Trinity is located right in the middle of Jornada del Muerto, and yes, it means dead man's way. You're driving along a two-lane highway that crosses the White Sands Missile Range deep in the Sonoran Desert, New Mexico. It was night, and the road was empty. The sky was black velvet, and the stars shone with a clarity that can only be seen where there is absolutely no civilization. Sometimes a meteor flashed on the horizon, like a lonely snowflake. I was alone, my trusty Ford F-150, and the occasional armadillo. All I needed was a stinky old dog named Buster to turn it into a sad country song. I remembered a few days ago. It's funny how a simple decision can change your life. Cross the street or not, turn left or right, scratch the itch or not. We make hundreds of these decisions every day, and sometimes they can kill us. I couldn't point to anything specific. She just acted differently. There are too many details about the work, as if she was painting a picture. Too much attention to schedules, as if she was watching me, and scrupulous fulfillment of marital duties. She seemed to think that by having sex with me more often, I would become less suspicious of her. In today's world, it is too easy to get to the truth. In fact, people would cheat less if they knew how far technology extends. So when that little devil called suspicion piqued my fancy, I simply downloaded an expensive bluejacking program. The only problem is that you can find out things you don't want to know. Brenda was a great wife. Smart, witty, beautiful, and a real beast in bed. How we met and got married is not important. Suffice it to say that for 14 years, we lived a happy middle-class life in the suburbs of Northeast Albuquerque. We consciously decided not to have children so we could afford the best: a beautiful house, frequent trips, and expensive restaurants. Brenda was the epitome of sexy, petite, dark hair, dark eyes, and very curvy, with lovely breasts and stunning long legs. But her best asset was her elastic calipagian butt, so to speak. My wife did PR consulting for a global firm that made a fortune paving paradise. Given New Mexico's sunny climate, homebuilding development has been a lucrative industry for some time. The only problem was that the people living in this paradise might not want to pave it. Therefore, Brenda met and communicated a lot with big money and politicians. Brenda's career was for me the equivalent of Dante's ninth circle of hell. You see, I'm a nerd, and nerds rarely go outside. I was doing botanical work at Sandia National Laboratory, so we lived in Albuquerque. The job was high-paying and low-stress because I was very good at what I did. I work in counterintelligence technology. It is a profession dedicated to lies and deceit, a kind of politics. The job requires a lot of old-fashioned machismo, but it's more Dr. Evil than Conan. Of course, the devil's cunning always defeats stupid muscles. You may be wondering how Brenda and I ended up in a hot girl and a nerd situation. As I said, the details of our romance are unimportant. We got along because we were both smart, funny, and loved adventure. She dated many athletes and handsome men. I'm not ugly, and I'm quite wealthy. That's why I also had affairs with hot women. The problem was that everyone we were with before we met each other bored us to tears. You will spend a significant portion of your life with one person after marriage. Therefore, it is better to choose someone who excites you. Brenda and I had completely different personalities, but we suited each other as if we were made for each other. This doesn't mean we walked around holding hands. We had our own interests and special skills, but our complementary qualities strengthened our connection. Brenda's emotions made her a fascinating partner. There was never a dull moment with her, but sometimes her feelings got the better of her, and she counted on me to calm her down. I'm too smart. Brenda was getting me out of my head. Neither of us were big. Brenda was 5'2", and I could generously be called 5'9". But we were both completely healthy. We both loved the outdoors, and Albuquerque was the perfect place for that. We hiked, biked, or kayaked daily. People thought we were the perfect couple. I think it was my short stature that gave Hondo the idea that Brenda would be an easy target. Richard Tudwell was a neighbor. He was a major in one of the training wings at Kirtland and played the role of the great American hero. He even took a nickname for himself. Nobody knew where he got it from since he was not a pilot, but he preferred to be called Hondo. Most of us just called him Tud, mainly because he hated it. Thud was a big guy, half a foot taller than me and about 70 pounds heavier. A lot of it was fat, while I didn't have an ounce of excess weight at my 175 pounds. But the contrast in size gave the impression that I was only 3/4 of what he was, and he wasn't shy about pointing it out. Every guy has been bullied at some point. Most either tolerate it or fight. But there are some fun alternatives. I've always had a wit. My standard response in situations with bullies was a witty remark that everyone understood except the bully. The main thing was to make sure that the guy realized that he had been defeated only when he turned around and his head fell. So when Hondo patronizingly called me Little Davy, I just laughed at myself and responded, "Not where it matters, little big guy." The look of today's confusion as he burst out laughing was priceless. The snake came into my garden because people in our area like to have parties. I was interested in many things. None of them included gossip, hints, or outright judgments about the daily affairs of distant acquaintances. But Brenda was basking in it. I could never figure out if her circle of friends truly enjoyed each other's company, or if the parties were simply a battleground for them to mark their territory. All I know is that there was too much drinking and too much contact between the various participants. I went to these terrible events because that's what good husbands do. However, since I could care less about golf or the Albuquerque Isotopes win-loss record, I always found myself among the secondary spouses, while insiders enjoyed the joys of the herd. The usual course of events: a cheerful arrival, then a machine gun chatter of small conversations until they caught up with the events of the long 6 days that they had been separated. Then, with the wheels of the machinery lubricated with copious amounts of alcohol, the participants settled down for the real purpose of the evening cozy, drunken conversation. These discussions typically involved overly intimate touching, a bit of questionable leaning, and melodramatic outpourings of emotion over topics that would seem trivial if both parties were in their right minds. Brenda lived it. She told me that she was a person among people. Well, that was undeniable, but she also liked to play the role of confessor for her stupid friends. Vampires need to drink blood, and Brenda seemed to have the same need for gossip. However, I learned some very shocking things about the supposedly happily married residents of our area. At one of these parties, I found my wife in an intimate conversation with Honda Tudwell. It was a revelation. Tude was hunched over and looking dejected, and Brenda was holding his hand tenderly with both of hers. I would have believed the pretense if Thud hadn't been staring hungrily at Brenda's delicious cleavage as he poured out his heart. I hated this guy for a lot of reasons other than his fake macho act. The scene before me added another point to the accusation. Tud was a tireless womanizer. He told anyone stupid enough to ask that it was his privilege as the alpha male of the herd. We all thought it was because he was an immoral jerk. We usually ignored him unless he was flirting with your wife. Then there was an impulse to quickly remove her from his clutches. So I said casually, although I was seething inside, "Come on, Brenda, it's getting late." She raised her head, anger flashing across her face, and said, "You don't see that we're discussing something important here, Davy." This was a new and unusual reaction. There I realized that I was caught. Therefore, he took on the noble image of grief. He said, "No, Brenda, you helped me a lot. You need to go home to your husband." He then sadly patted her hand, stood up, and disappeared into the mass of people, leaving behind him broken and defeated. St. Brenda was furious all the way home. It turned out that Thug's wife, the woman he had loved since their graduation from Texas A&M University, was cheating on him, and he was devastated. They were the perfect couple. Thud was a brash, narcissistic jerk, and Polly was an empty-headed, narcissistic doll who was once Miss Texas World. She was amazing in a boo-boo-ba-boom way unless you had to talk to her. I mean, people only have so much blood in their body. In Polly's case, it was obvious that her huge breasts were siphoning off the blood that should have been going to her brain. However, with a face and body like that, it didn't matter. But I digress. Thud lay in wait for Brenda in a dark corner to ask for advice. When I stumbled upon their cozy conversation, Brenda was helping him manage his grief, his pursuit of everything that wore a dress. Thus, he had many of his own adventures, but Brenda bought the story entirely. In the ensuing argument, Brenda tried to justify her desire to listen to the smug jerk by telling me that he was actually very sensitive under all that bravado. Of course, this remark opened up another front. I said angrily, "And how do you know what might be hiding under Teen Tudwell's appearance? Did you spend time in his treehouse?" Brenda looked really embarrassed. She said, "Well, he came by a few times to talk to you, but you were never home." It amazed me. There wasn't even an attempt to be invisible. I said, "Have you considered that maybe his target is you?" Brenda was genuinely puzzled. She said, "Why should he want to talk to me? You are the one with great government powers." He said he had something to discuss regarding clearance. Talk about inattention. I said, "Listen, Brenda, you're the sexiest woman on the block. All the guys on the block think so." Brenda looked at me with that typical feminine look that said she loved hearing it, but she hated hearing it from me because it created the basis for jealousy. I continued, "The camel just wanted to see how far under the tent he could get his big fat lips. I hope you didn't invite him inside." She looked unsure. She said, "I invited him several times. He asked permission to come and wait for you, but he didn't stay long." I said, sounding even more disgruntled, "How many times has this happened, and why wasn't it there when I came home?" Brenda looked like something was starting to get to her. She said, "Well, for the last month, it's been 3 or 4 times a week. He stopped by on his way home from Kirtland, but you were always at work. He waited for a while and we talked, but he had to go home, otherwise Polly would have been worried." I laughed out loud and said, "That's the biggest nonsense I've ever heard. Since when did Tudwell care what his wife thought?" Brenda looked at me indignantly and said, "He values his marriage very much. He constantly tells me how lucky we are to have each other. He wants to have what we have. That's why I was so supportive when he told me about Polly's affair." I said angrily, "He wants something that I have, and let it remain just a wish. From now on, tell Hondo to call me if he needs to talk. I don't want to see him alone with you." Brenda said very angrily, "You can't tell me what to do. This is not the Middle Ages." The discussion went down a dark and dangerous road. So I said, "In the spirit of compromise, if he comes around again, just call me at work. I guarantee I'll be there in less than 10 minutes. I knew this would scare the beast away. Of course, there was no sex that night and for several weeks after that. However, we really loved each other, and the ice gradually melted. By the end of the month, we had completely forgotten about the incident. I thought, Santa Fe is 1.5 miles above sea level, so even if it's hot in Albuquerque, it's always pleasant. Additionally, Santa Fe has the quirkiest art scene in the U.S. Brenda and I were both fans of Georgia O'Keeffe, and her museum had several originals for sale. The paintings cost about $1.5 million, but I set my sights on a signed serigraph. It seemed like we could get it for just $3,000, so we went there to try our luck. Sometimes we spend the night in a tent, but this was a trip for fine art. So we chose the other end of the spectrum and stayed at the Five Graces Hotel, which was relatively close to the museum. The place has the look of a hacienda with fake adobe walls and chunky Spanish furniture. The bed looked like it had been carved out by Ferdinand and Isabella in a monster shop. The word ornamental did not begin to describe it, which was convenient because Brenda was finally in the mood. My wife has been distant all month. I attributed this to the Thuda controversy. She thought I was cruel and insensitive, whereas I thought that. She acted like an idiot. We actually made love more often than usual, but this was not the all-encompassing extravagance to which we are accustomed. Obviously, some tender feelings remained. Night fell as we finished our meal at a nearby restaurant. There's something special about sunset on a warm evening in Santa Fe. The air is soft, and the light has a unique red-gold hue. The sky was almost purple with the bright stars, and the crescent moon rising in the northeast made you want to howl at it, and Brenda's look told me there would be a lot of howling this evening. She wore a little black dress with a necklace that filled the neckline with pieces of pure turquoise. I bought it for her this afternoon. Brenda is of Italian descent, and the contrast of the bright blue stones against her smooth, dark Mediterranean skin simply radiated beauty. My wife was blessed with one of those perfectly proportioned faces with huge brown eyes and a head of thick dark brown hair, which she wears in a stylish pixie cut with choppy layers that highlight her high cheekbones and pointed chin. When Brenda focuses her deep dark eyes on some poor guy, there's almost nothing he won't give her, which makes her such an effective negotiator. However, Brenda's mouth and sculpted lips are what stop the action. Movie stars pay a fortune to get full, flexible lips like hers. We usually spend some time preparing for sex rather than just diving into it. But my wife was on a mission. As soon as we entered the room, she slipped out of her dress and pulled me into the bedroom by my tie. Then it dawned on me, when did she start wearing thongs? This gave me even more reason to think. Brenda had never done anything like this in our entire marriage. We had sex. After that, we lay side by side in the moonlight, holding hands. I almost asked her about it then. I should have. But the warning signs were still too new, and we had been married too long to suddenly encounter it. So I guess it's natural to shy away. I mean, seriously, who is brave enough to bet their happiness on one roll of the dice after a fantastic night of sex? Your life will take a much darker path if you get the snake eye. I had a great career, a beautiful wife, and life was good. So let's leave the questions for another time. Brenda turned to me and said, almost desperately, I love you, Davy. Never forget this. You are my man. We'll grow old together, just you and me. It was a fitting end to a very strange evening. The next day, we walked slowly to the museum. Brenda is a sophisticated petite woman with a compact body who looks stunning in stylish shorts. Latin American men are less reserved than Germans or Norwegians when it comes to the type of ass she puts on display. Therefore, when we walked, they looked at her significantly. I said with a smile, "You have a fan club." She smiled playfully at me, grabbed one of her buttocks, and said, "This is just for you." A guy passing us crashed into a mailbox. This was the essence of our marriage. Some men see their wives as trophies, living proof of their masculinity. I've never seen Brenda in this light. She was my equal and my partner. Her beauty was just one aspect of her contribution to our relationship. Her energetic spirit and loving, warm heart made her who she was. But now I find myself in a Chinese conundrum. The more I pressed my wife about how Thud had been fooling her, the more she insisted that I was evil and jealous. At the same time, I couldn't take Thud aside and tell him to stop his act of treason. I'd look like a paranoid weakling. I refrained from any action, hoping that she would come to her senses on her own, or Thud would set himself up by overdoing it. At the end of the day, you have to trust your wife. She is the only person in this cruel world you can rely on, and it's a very slippery slope if you start to doubt. Maybe I'm too cynical, but I thought Brenda's innate faith in humanity was her Achilles heel. This made her a logical victim for anyone cruel enough to take advantage of her innate kindness. Of course, you have to be an immoral scoundrel to do this, but I knew one person who fit this description. Shakespeare was the first to write it down. All the world's a stage, and the people in it are actors. In short, what you think is reality is written and directed by you in your own head. Thud could have been a joke in his role as Captain America, alpha male of the pack. But alas, he did not know this. In fact, he believed that he was entitled to all the privileges, and that is exactly what he did. The reality of his aggressive attempt to pull Brenda into his orbit made him a threat because she couldn't see it. So I had to do something. I guess there are people who actually cheat and don't get caught, but most couples open up because cheating is a very difficult process. If you're cheating, you need to keep track of all the usual things, plus a whole bunch of unusual ones. and ordinary people simply cannot cover all aspects. This is why people who do things they shouldn't inevitably get exposed to. Strange behavior always has a logical explanation. This rule applies to all aspects of life. For example, scientists discovered the planet Neptune in this way. They noticed that Uranus's orbit was irregular, made calculations, and found Neptune, which was pulling it. This is why the phenomenon of hidden influence is called the planetary body principle. The same applies to cheating. There is always some sinister body behind the change in normal behavior. Watching Thud and Brenda interact at parties, I saw how he tried to pull her into his orbit. So I decided to cross the Rubicon. I used the 6 days before the next party to visit the dark market and buy a simple package from the man in the middle. I left him innocent, because you quickly become the target of scrutiny from both foreign and domestic agencies if you start purchasing military hacking tools from the dark web market. I dropped the bomb at the next barbecue. I sat with the rest of the nerds while Thud wandered around looking like someone shot his dog. Brenda carefully followed him, as I told her not to do. I scanned today's phone. Of course, it was open. He never worried about stupid things like protecting his phone from me. Of course, the only reliable way to protect him from me would be to run him over with a car. But I digress. It took less than a minute to install my little program on today's phone. She immediately sent Brenda a photo of the adorable kitten. The malware was hidden in steganography. She opened the photo and cast a pleased glance at Thud. The rootkit she launched when she did this did the rest. Thud looked puzzled, which was natural since both of them had no idea how much hidden crap I had just added to the background processes on their devices. Everything they did from that point on photos, calls, and messages was under my control and saved in a cloud account that I controlled. I looked at my wife as she comforted Tudwell. She was wearing a short summer dress with her deliciously long tanned legs peeking out from underneath and an inviting cleavage framed by straps. She radiated life and happiness. I felt a wave of melancholy. I said under my breath, "Brenda, I barely knew you." It was a paradox of paradoxes. I wanted to know. I needed to know. But I didn't want to find out. Healthy people do not dwell on events that could destroy their lives. It just proved that I wasn't as cool and reserved as I wanted to appear. The world is a tough place, and a good marriage gets you through the crap. He gives you a companion and a friend, no matter the threat or circumstance. So I really wanted to chalk up my suspicions to simple paranoia. I could live with a low opinion of myself. What I could not bear was a discovery that would destroy my orderly and happy life. A figurative symbol of the commitment of two people is their willingness to limit their intimate relationships only to each other. Seriously, you can't share your private self with more than one person and maintain a special connection, and you can't trust someone who thinks they can. The problem is that humans are not naturally monogamous. Therefore, it takes a conscious effort of will to remain faithful. A strong and moral person will keep his promises. People without honor know. Thus, in a sense, loyalty is a litmus test of a person's character. I had known Brenda for a very long time and knew how important personal integrity was to her. So I couldn't imagine any circumstances in which she would knowingly compromise her precious sense of self, especially to just scratch an itch, theoretically speaking. But if you're secretly trying to learn something, don't be surprised when you find out something you don't want. But I was still shocked. The fatal call occurred at 9:23 am on Monday after a party. It was Thud. Thud said, radiating genuine gratitude, "Brenda, you are the only person who understands what I am going through. I would have committed suicide if it weren't for your love. It's so hard to keep our hands to ourselves knowing what we shared." My heart sank to my feet. Brenda said with irritation in her voice, "I already told you, Richard, I don't love you. I love my husband. I'm only doing this to help you adjust to your new life without Polly." What? My brain went into DEFCON 1 alarm mode. Thud said in a voice full of regret, "I know that, but this is the only thing that helps me stay afloat. Can we meet again? I really need your special comfort." Brenda said, her voice softening, "I understand. I would feel the same way if I found out Davy was cheating on me. We may meet for the last time, but you will have to deal with this without my help. I don't want to lose my marriage because of your problems." Seriously? Has this woman completely lost her mind? The rest of the call was only about agreements. Tudwell was going to be in Holloman on Air Force business, and he wanted Brenda to meet him in Alamogordo this coming Wednesday. It was over 200 miles away, so this probably seemed like a safe distance to meet. Brenda hesitated, but that's pitiful groan finally overcame her resistance. Brenda's company owned a fleet of small two-seat helicopters. They used them to fly around their region. Practically, this was necessary to participate in real estate development in New Mexico, since desert areas are not close to each other. So Brenda had a private helicopter pilot's license and was used to flying to different places. It was one of her more interesting quirks. She could easily fly to Alamogordo and back within one business day. You might think that my wife was either a complete idiot or a woman of easy virtue. No one with an ick higher than room temperature would buy that's bullshit. But this man had been persistently and purposefully trying to deceive her for a long time. It looks like he succeeded. Brenda was kind, warm, and sentimental by nature. She loved puppies and kittens and cried at every sentimental movie. Unfortunately, she was also willing to deceive herself into believing that people were telling the truth. The call ended and Brenda said, "I'll meet you at the usual place, but this is the last time." Thud said, with a voice full of tears, "Yes, I know, and thank you." My first reaction was mixed, like Wile E. Coyote's when he realizes he's run off a cliff. And like a coyote, it was immediately followed by a long fall, tearing your insides across the desolate landscape. How could Brenda be so stupid? Stroke, heart attack, take your pick. You're walking down the street carefree, and then your life changes. All old certainties evaporate, giving way to a terrible and all-consuming feeling of despair and hopelessness. That's how it hit me. The first burst of anger was directed at himself. I underestimated them. He was such a caricature of a person. I just assumed everyone could see right through him. But of course I wasn't there for the long hours he spent at our kitchen table painting a different picture for my wife. Thud must have convinced Brenda that he was sensitive and sincere, a real sweet guy underneath all that show. In fact, he may have used what Brenda knew of his disgusting personality as a form of mental judo to convince her that his brazen behavior was meant to protect his gentle self from a harsh, cruel world. It would be like an illegal substance for Brenda. Since that social development never progressed beyond the age of 14, it probably did not occur to him that there might be consequences. I'm not a physical type, but I have certain skills, and I plan to give Tudwell a hell of a life. It was on Monday. I had business in Sandia, but the burning anger in my heart demanded satisfaction. I didn't know the whole story yet. In fact, I didn't even know for sure that anything had happened. My little program hasn't found any new information since Monday morning. However, I was preparing for the worst. I was going to be in Alamogordo for the final act because I needed to officially close the book with Brenda. Then I could suffer in peace. Of course, my decision to end everything on Wednesday meant that I would have to endure 2 nights with a woman who perfectly played the role of my adoring wife. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. It simply means that people combine contradictory facts into a convenient truth. Essentially, a person is divided into 2 contradictory personalities. Tonight, I dealt with the real Brenda, loving and devoted. The time-altering version only appeared when I wasn't around. I tried to look for any signs that my wife thought she was betraying me. All I saw was love and loyalty. Her eyes shone with devotion as we dined at La Crêpe Mitchell, a small restaurant we loved for its vegetarian dishes. She truly believed her lies. This made me wonder if she had gone crazy. Maybe the stress of cheating turns a person into a crazy person, especially if they are essentially decent people. Even so, temporary insanity can be an excuse for murder, but it doesn't justify cheating. I could have begged Brenda not to go and told her I knew the whole story. But nothing in our situation would change. She has already crossed the point of no return. Therefore, my goal was retribution, not reconciliation. Tudwell should have been severely punished, and it would have been a masterful execution of the hacker's art. Firstly, I needed photographs, the more candid the better. Then I was going to expose Thud's sordid life to all of his contacts, his wife, his mother, his pastor, all the way down to his commanding officer and possibly the Secretary of the Air Force. The beauty was that I wouldn't leave any traces, because it will be that's own phone sending incriminating evidence. He would know it was me. But everyone else would wonder why this man decided to commit career and personal suicide. Intoxication from access to a person's fate in one hand held device. Then I would really give him a hell of a life. I was going to post his personal information, name, date of birth, and social security number, all in its entirety on all the message boards on the dark web. By the end of the day, Thud will have 150 new mortgages and several thousand fresh Visa cards. Plus Interpol and the FBI will be looking for him to talk to. After the fruits of this atrocity, I planned to send him a note, probably to his new address under the bridge. Seriously, Thud, don't thank me. It was my pleasure. Revenge truly is best served cold. I left for work at the usual time. Brenda was as beautiful and energetic as ever when she kissed me goodbye. I just couldn't understand it. The love in her eyes was real. She'll have to explain that to me the next time we talk. Of course, this will be after the expulsion from Eden. The trip takes 4 hours by car, so I arrived in Alamogordo close to 2 o'clock. It was about an hour and a half, going 120 miles an hour as the crow flies. Brenda's Denali H-3 helicopter was parked in the desert behind the Quality Inn and Suites on White Sands Boulevard. It was a yellow and white helicopter that she especially enjoyed flying. Since Brenda had already arrived, I decided to get down to business. It was your standard chain of hotels serving Air Force Holloman. I walked into the lobby dressed in business casual attire, and the receptionist didn't even look at me. I sat down in one of the chairs in the lobby and used my iPad to hack into the hotel server. It only took a few minutes. They were in room 217. Tudwell booked it in his name. I thought, what an arrogant fool. I don't like unpleasant confrontations. They solve nothing and often get out of control. My profession gives me access to cool military toys. That's why I took Aardvark with me. This is one of those technological marvels that came out of Afghanistan. Our guys want to know the situation before they knock down the door. That's why they use Aardvark. It is a black plastic device with a flat probe designed to look under any standard door frame, hence the name. The camera gives the user a panoramic view of the room. It records HD audio and video. There are 4 channels in case the room is dark. This would give me everything I need to destroy Tudwell. I could hear everything as I carefully inserted the device into the room. This froze me for a moment and gave the knot that was now permanently lodged in my stomach another painful turn. However, it was good for me. It strengthened my heart. From that moment on, there was no turning back. They left the curtains open. After all, it was the second floor, so the stage was well lit. I had everything I needed. I put the device away, put it in my backpack, and went down to the Starbucks in the lobby to await my fate. I sipped on a decent nutty coffee while using Filmmaker Pro to create a 1-minute best moments there reel. It was a compromising and extremely hot little clip. I kept it short on purpose. Some servers have size filters, and I wanted to make sure the whole world saw Tudwell's betrayal. I also didn't want the viewer's attention to wane. I had Thud portrayed in his film debut as an extremely unfaithful husband. His face was the center of attention throughout the entire video. I have edited carefully to avoid showing Brenda's face. I didn't want to spread my cuckold status to the entire internet, and I still loved this stupid woman. When the clip was ready, I emailed it from Tuda's phone. It was at the top of his pants pocket, which he hastily kicked off before having sex with my wife. Isn't wireless technology great? I sent incriminating evidence to his 139 phone contacts with the title Fun Times. This must have really released a stench into the sorority house. As soon as I got home, I planned to dump there on the dark web. But I needed the anonymous Tor browser for this. No one in their right mind would dare enter this terrible place without protection. At exactly 3 o'clock, the elevator doors opened and Richard Tudwell stepped out. He didn't notice me. Why not? I shouldn't have been there. He looked smug and satisfied, like every cat that ate the canary. I hated him. Luckily for my sanity, his phone rang as he began to cross the lobby. He answered happily. There was a long silence while someone spoke. Then Thud's face took on an expression of absolute bewilderment, which was soon replaced by an expression of horror. He argued for several seconds. Then the person on the other end suddenly hung up. Thud ran out to his car in a panic and sped back down White Sands Boulevard. Apparently his wife or boss had just seen his little indiscretion. I was enjoying the beginning of the end of Over There's overly complacent life when the elevator dinged again and my wife stepped out. She looked both beautiful and thoughtful. It was clear that she had a lot on her mind. She walked towards the back of the hotel where her helicopter was parked, her eyes downcast. It was the walk of shame of a traitor. Then she felt a presence in front of her. She stopped and looked up, irritation in her eyes. That look turned into an expression of incomprehension, and then realization dawned on her. This is called vasovagal syncope. This is caused by shock. The more common term is fainting. At first her eyes expressed pure amazement. Then they rolled away. I caught her and dragged her exquisite little body to the nearest sofa in the lobby. The last thing I wanted was a scene. Luckily, the guy at the front desk disappeared. I sat her there, still supporting her with my hand. She came to her senses almost immediately, looked embarrassed, and then she realized whose arms she was lying in. Her sigh was so loud that anyone in the lobby would have heard it. Luckily, it was just the two of us there. I said as kindly as possible, I don't want you to explain anything. All I want is to take care of the necessary final formalities. Brenda's face collapsed. She said in a voice filled with sorrow, "Oh God, Davy, this shouldn't have happened." I thought to myself, what did you think was going to happen, Sherlock? But I said, you know what I do. She grabbed me by the shoulders in panic and said, you have to let me explain. It's not what it seems. I thought, they never have new or original lines. I said, it's exactly what it seems, honey. Do you want to repeat? I clicked the icon on the iPad, and we both heard. Her face melted into tears. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed inconsolably, muttering over and over, you were never supposed to know. We were still alone in the lobby, and I wanted to avoid hysteria. So I pointed to the women's restroom and said, why don't you go there and get yourself cleaned up, and we'll talk at home tonight. I have a long road ahead of me. She nodded, despair written all over every aspect of her beautiful face. She said plaintively, I love you, Davy, only you. I stood up and looked at her sitting on the couch and said with complete honesty and sincerity, I love you too, Brenda. That's why it's so difficult. It's already too late. We'll talk at home. I turned on my heel and walked as calmly as possible towards the parking lot. The sounds of a woman crying rang in my ears. I started to feel shaky, so I stopped at the first place I saw on the northern route. I needed a drink. The waitress, who looked like something out of a tattoo and piercing museum, brought me a beer. Beer was a necessity. I began to experience the effects of shock, nausea, and chills. I realized that I needed to quickly get back to the car, otherwise I would not make it home. On the way, I enjoyed thinking about the nightmare I had created for Tudwell. The look of absolute horror on his face was priceless, and the best part was that he hadn't seen anything yet. The real pain will come when the dark web finishes its work. Like I said, there are much better ways to get revenge than going to jail, like ruining the bastard's life. However, there was also a pathetic little bird whose soul I had just crushed. I saw it in her eyes. She knew the price. This is not a matter of lost trust or my ego. This is a simplified view of cheating. The exclusive bond was severed and every aspect of our special bond disappeared. We could no longer say, just you and me forever. The ghost of Richard, there Tudwell, will always be between us, saying, "But I was there too." We all have our weaknesses, each of us. Some lucky people manage to live their entire lives without becoming a victim of exploitation. However, more often than not, your personal shortcomings become your undoing. Worse, there is always collateral damage, like when the one you supposedly hold closest is pulled into the abyss with you. This is the reality we both know. For me, I had that empty feeling when you realize you're in shit without an oar. I needed to take action to address Brenda's infidelity. But what should I do? Divorce her? Bury it in the garden? Living like a cuckold? I'm not into violence, and I'm not a cuckold. So door number one seemed like the only viable option. We will talk. But now Brenda was a stranger to me. I had no idea what could have motivated her to do such a painful act. It was completely out of character for her, as I thought. I assumed that we had a common vision for the future. Obviously, this was not true. There will be no more happy, intimate moments, no more enjoying the little things in life, no more growing old together. This will be a painful separation for both of us. We were just two strangers, alone in a strange land. It was completely dark as I drove through the Mockingbird Mountains and into the desolate region leading to State Road 525. SiriusXM was playing Blake Shelton's When Someone Knows You So Well. The words were bitterly ironic. I was driving through the bleak landscape of the Sonoran Desert. It was hard to believe that this barren wasteland was the starting point for the future of humanity. Our modern era began at 5:29 am on July 16, 1945. That's when the proof of concept for a nuclear device flashed across the desert sand in front of me. Its code name was Trinity. Robert Oppenheimer coined it, supposedly referring to the poetry of John Donne. But American physicist Ken Bainbridge said it best. Now we are all sons of a bitch. The splitting of the atom changed everything about human existence. The scientists who did it had no idea whether their little contraption would work or what would happen when they pressed the button. Therefore, they wanted to conduct the test as far from civilization as possible. The U.S. Air Force bombing and gunnery range at Alamogordo was an ideal location for this. He was in 100 miles of harsh wasteland, full only of lizards and snakes. The only structure within a 20-mile radius was the building where they were assembling the bomb. When they were finished, they hoisted their creation onto a 100-foot-tall steel tower that stood on 4 legs, sunk 20 feet into the desert. Then the world witnessed the dawn of the nuclear age. The explosion turned the sand into a new radioactive material called trinitite, and Oppenheimer, who was something of a poet, was quoted as saying, "Now I have become death, destroyer of worlds." I was approaching the road leading to Trinity itself. The landscape was illuminated by the strange silvery light that comes from a night sky with trillions of stars and a full moon. The road was to my right, easily visible. My car's headlights illuminated the historical marker, and I saw a small figure standing at the intersection looking straight at me. It was the strangest, most amazing vision imaginable. I braked sharply and stopped. This supposedly alien character walked into the cone of light from my headlights. She was a young woman of incredible beauty, small, but unusually curvy. I could tell she was extremely attractive because she was wearing a tight black suit that hugged her from her neck to her boots. Her skin was flawless porcelain, and her pretty face was elven, with huge, wide-set green eyes and short black hair. The suit had some strange insignia over her surprisingly prominent left breast, and she wore a device on her right arm that looked like the monitors U-2 pilots wear. I knew there were several secret airfields in the area, including Stallion Air Force Base, which I was soon passing. So forgive me if I just assumed she jumped out of a spy plane. I got out of the car. She stood on long and slender legs, one hip tilted to the side, looking at me with a slight smile. It was a strange reaction for someone who had just parachuted from 65,000 feet. I said, concerned, "Are you okay, ma'am? Can I take you to a place where you can contact your people?" She said in a melodious voice, "No, thank you. I simply determined my coordinates. Everything here is so confusing." It was a strange answer. It was as if she was refusing an offer of a ride home from work. I said, "There's nothing here for miles, ma'am. Let me take you to a place where you can make a call. How did you get here?" She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Through the portal, of course. Why are you asking?" Okay, this has gone from weird to crazy. I tried to remain calm so as not to upset the crazy woman. "And where is this portal, ma'am?" She waved her hand towards the northeast and said, "There, it's a long way, you know." She gestured in the direction of the black obelisk marking the 0 point, 4 miles away. I said, still trying to sound conversational, "So you came here through a portal that transported you from some other place, right? And where exactly is this other place?" She made a sound that sounded like a combination of coughing and sighing and looked at me expectantly. She then added, "I needed to leave. It wasn't safe." "Okay, let's play along with the crazy lady." I said, "So you were running away from something I can't pronounce. Who are they?" She said, "These are intergalactic predators, and my planet is their new hunting zone. I was lucky that I was at my post in the transport center when they came." Her tone was as if everyone knew about the growl-wheeze hiccup. Then she stopped and seemed to be thinking about something. She added reassuringly, "Don't worry. I turned off the portal when I jumped. They won't be able to get here." Well, at least this conversation was more interesting than country music. I said, "Okay, let's say you are who you say you are. Then why do you look human, and why can we communicate in English except for some words?" She said cheerfully, "English, is that what your language is called?" She then added, "I'm speaking straight into your mind. But some of the things we talk about don't have concepts that can be translated." So my little crazy lady claimed to be a telepath. She continued, "All life forms of our type have evolved from one basic design. This is the most effective natural structure, so of course we are similar." I laughed and said, "You have the answer to everything, don't you?" She smiled sweetly and said, "Why are you so sad?" It amazed me. I said, "How do you know I'm sad?" It was probably my body language. She added, with a voice full of innocent curiosity, "Is it because your companion has just been busy with another man?" I braked sharply, stopping the car right in the middle of the road, and stared at it in horror. I said anxiously, "How do you know this? Who are you?" She said, "My name is Stella, and as I said, I am from the Cough Psi in the Perseus sleeve of our galaxy. Your sun is in the outer arm, so we're practically neighbors." She smiled at me playfully and then just sat there looking at me as if she had just made a joke. No need to tell me. Of course I knew she was delirious, but to play along with her, I said, "If you are from an advanced race of aliens, why are you here in the middle of the desert? You would think that your people would set up their arrival point in a more convenient and civilized place." She said, as if lecturing a child, "The builders install a portal at a point where they find irrefutable evidence that a culture has reached a level at which it is worth studying." I said, "So the explosion of the first atomic bomb was like a signal for your people." Damn it, now I'm starting to sound like her. She nodded and said, "Yes, there are billions of civilizations in our galaxy, but only the advanced ones are interesting." She said it as if everyone should know it. The crazy lady continued, "Builders actually prefer a remote access point. This allows them to come and go in secret. We have been studying your planet for more than 70 years. We even lost one of our first expeditions here, not far away." She probably meant Roswell. The woman was definitely suffering from some form of psychosis. Seriously, she truly believed that she was an alien. So I couldn't just leave her at the bus station in Albuquerque. I mean, it wouldn't be right to leave a woman who was so crazy. The problem is that I was rushing home to discuss the end of my marriage, and I knew the conversation would get tense if I showed up with this adorable little thing in tow. It would be like pouring a gallon of gasoline on a burning fire, so no pressure at all. Stella said with sympathy, "You can leave me if I prevent you from bumping into your companion." I didn't slow down. I had become accustomed to her reading my facial expressions, as if she were actually reading my thoughts. However, I realized that I had made a commitment. My new friend was definitely a decent person. I said, "I don't know your story, but I can't just leave you like that. I need to find help for you." Beauty like hers wouldn't last 2 minutes on the rough streets of Albuquerque. I said, "I don't know how you knew, but you're right. I just saw my wife with another man, and in my culture, that is the harshest form of betrayal. Now I am returning home to negotiate our separation." Culture? I needed to watch myself, otherwise she would involve me in her delusions. Stella, the star girl, was very convincing. She nodded and said, "Yes, that is true in most family-based cultures. This ensures the origin of offspring. In my world, it doesn't matter, since all children are raised by the central two psi and psi." I assumed it was her untranslatable word for government. She added seriously, "Of course, couples can choose to commit themselves exclusively. It's very romantic. But the psi hiccup they implant during the bonding ceremony kills them if they have extramarital affairs after the bonding." Psi hiccup was clearly technology. Perhaps we should have one of these. It would definitely make couples take fidelity more seriously. I smiled at the thought and said, "We haven't gotten there yet. But our technology is good enough that you can always find out if a person is cheating. That's how I caught my wife. And the guy who seduced her will definitely regret it when I'm done ruining his life." Stella said, thoughtfully, "I never wanted to tie myself down. Sex is too much fun to be limited to just one man. On the other hand, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be so attached to a man." I said, "This is wonderful and scary. The intimacy that two people share far outweighs the lack of variety in partners. Brenda and I made up for any limitation we experienced with exceptional frequency and quality. The exclusivity of our connection made sex so much more meaningful." Damn it, I forgot. Our exclusivity is now in the past tense. I tried to remain calm. After all, I was talking to a crazy person, but I couldn't stop the angry thoughts in my head. This was the archetypal duality that infidelity creates. I loved Brenda and I hated her, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought that killing Tudwell might not be such a bad idea. Stella said soothingly, "Killing another man is not the solution. You've already done much worse by exposing him as a predator. You need to talk to your date, find out why she did this. Without knowing this, you will not be able to move on." "Okay, this is getting weird," I said. "My mind is in turmoil right now. I don't know how you do it. But you're right. I want Tudwell to live long and painfully. But Brenda is different." I tried to explain, "You can't just turn off your feelings for a person who was such a significant part of your life. My wife and I had an exclusive relationship. It was a living creature. Now it's dead. I'm feeling it. So my feeling of alienation is not a matter of ego or jealousy. This is a constant psychological barrier. I have lost all faith in her." My adorable little star girl added sympathetically, "Yes, I can feel it." "Is it true? You can feel the end of other people's hopes and dreams, can you?" I said with resignation. "My rational mind tells me that I need to forgive and forget, but my heart just won't let me do it. I would have reconciled with Brenda instantly if it had been something spontaneous, but I know that she met him more than once, so this was a planned and deliberate betrayal. Now I face the long and painful process of unraveling our lives." It helped to say it out loud, even to a crazy person. It also reminded me that sitting next to me was a supposedly alien from the planet Cough Psi in a tight black suit, with big, beautiful breasts swaying with every bump in the road. I said, hoping to find out the truth, "Honestly, isn't there someone you can call?" She said sadly, "No closer than 6 or 7,000 light years, and they've probably already been eaten." She turned her beautiful tear-stained face to me and said plaintively, "You are my only hope. I have to rely on you." Wonderful. I just adopted a gorgeous stray kitten in the process of breaking up with my cheating wife. Why does this have to happen to me? Even worse, this particular woman looked like the cover of Sports Illustrated. I was sure that her presence would not help in the process of divorcing Brenda, but what else could I do? I was planning my first steps as I merged onto I-25 and headed north. I knew I needed to find a place to live because I wasn't going to live with my soon-to-be ex-wife, so I decided that I would drop off my star girl first while I went to the house. The Marriott Albuquerque is a 15-story monolith in the area where I lived. It was a little too grandiose and expensive for my taste, but I wanted an anonymous place for Stella, and there's nothing better for anonymity than a big conference hotel. I was going to go back and try to figure out what to do with Stella once Brenda, and I had discussed the basics, and I had gathered a few things that would be needed. I told her to stay in the car while I checked us in. She asked, why? I didn't want to explain that if I walked her through the lobby, we'd end up at the Albuquerque Journal. She looked so gorgeous, especially in the tight suit. So I said, you never know. Authorities may be looking for aliens. She got an expression of absolute horror and said anxiously, I'll wait. I saw what they did to the people on the ship that crashed. Apparently, she imagined that she would be cut up like a lab rat. Check-in took a while because they had to find a room with 2 beds. I walked out the back door and walked Stella up the stairs to our room. The sight of her incredible, almost naked buttocks swaying in a tight suit on 14 floors sent me over the edge. As soon as we entered the room, she walked around as if she had never seen so much luxury. I said, there are no such places on your planet. I had already resigned myself to talking to her like an alien. She said, no, my planet is the same size as yours, but we have 100 times the population. So we live like rodents in small rooms in huge towers, each room with basic amenities. I thought she had just described Manhattan, but I said, well, try to relax. It will take some time. I showed her how to work the TV. She acted as if she had never seen anything so ancient, but she immediately became fixated on a cosmetics commercial. I closed the door while she was engrossed in the TV and went back down to the car. It was about midnight. It had been a long day, and I wanted to begin the painful process of figuring out why Brenda had betrayed me tomorrow after I'd gotten some sleep. But I needed to settle preliminary formalities. My wife was lying on the sofa in the living room when I arrived. She was wearing her old robe. She looked devastated and beautiful. My arrival woke her up. She stirred, sat up, her gorgeous bare legs swung off the couch, and she said shyly, "Hey, you're finally home." I said softly and lovingly, because you can't just turn off 14 years of a happy marriage. Yes, I need to grab a few things and arrange to talk tomorrow. I also wanted to make sure you were okay. She stood up and ran towards me. She buried her head in my chest, sobbing profusely, and said, "Oh God, Davy, I am so sorry. I never expected this to happen. I'm such a fool." I held her and stroked her back while she cried. I said, perhaps too abruptly, "Well, it happened. Now we both need to deal with the consequences. We will begin this process in the morning. But I'm so emotionally drained that I want nothing more than to sleep right now." She leaned back in my arms, looked at me with a burning gaze, and said, "Let's go to bed. I want to start fixing everything." I gave her a weak smile and said, "That won't happen, Brenda. This will be difficult enough without complicating everything with sex. I need to grab a few things, and I'm leaving. We will talk later." The next 15 minutes were excruciating. My wife, the woman I had loved for almost a third of my life, followed me, crying and begging me to stay as I gathered clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. Finally, I stopped, turned to her, and said angrily, "Listen, what did you expect? Did you think I would just accept your sex with that bastard as the price to pay for saving my marriage?" I've never spoken to her like that. This was her first hint that there could be serious consequences. She started whining, "It's only been a few weeks. You were never supposed to find out. I was so careful." This confirmed what I suspected. This was intentional. My heart exploded like the Death Star. I said, perhaps a little cruelly, "You play, you pay, now we both lose. I need to get out of here, or I'll say things I'll regret. I closed my suitcase, picked up my laptop, and headed to the car. Brenda followed me the whole way, sobbing, "Don't go. Please don't go. I'll do anything." It was heartbreaking. I'm a nerd, so of course I had to analyze everything. First, it was obvious that Brenda did not have a plan B. She expected to have a little fun and then return to life as my loving wife, her husband unsuspecting. Secondly, whatever her motive, she always knew that what she was doing was wrong. Finally, her reasons were more complex than simply helping Tudu through a difficult period. My wife was a teacher, right down to the tips of her colored nails. It also no doubt explained her strange fascination with this idiot's rehabilitation. However, that didn't explain her sex with him. Of course, Brenda probably thought the situation was temporary, and since no husbands were harmed in creating her fantasy, her actions were completely justified, at least in her own mind. I didn't like it and I didn't sympathize with it, but I knew it. Ultimately, it was Richard Turd Tudwell who needed to be brought to justice. Turd probably saw it as part of the game he played throughout his protracted youth. Cool guys got hot girls, so naturally Turd had to have my wife. Of course, I blamed Brenda too, but it was due to Tadwell's tricks that she turned to the dark side. So I didn't intend to unleash dark web hell on Brenda like I intended to do with Tadwell. However, our marriage was completed. History, nothing short of time travel could revive him. My thoughts returned to my little star girl. It was about 1 in the morning when I entered, trying to be as quiet as possible. To my complete surprise, instead of sleeping, Stella was lying naked on her bed. I just stood and watched. She was a burst of color. Her skin was like a thin alabaster. The contrast with her jet black hair and huge green eyes was striking. I knew Stella was incredibly graceful. Her costume left nothing to the imagination, but I didn't realize how toned her body was, with toned sides, muscular legs, and real abs. She said softly, "I knew you would need comfort after your conversation with your companion." What kind of feminine compassion is this? First Brenda, now her. Are all women women of easy virtue? Then I felt her touch on my mind, and she recoiled and jumped to her feet. Embarrassed, she quickly threw on one of those fluffy white hotel robes. She looked puzzled. The robe was 3 or 4 sizes too big, making her appear 6 years old. Her perfect face changed from alabaster to a blazing red. She gasped, "I'm so sorry, I saw it. Life is completely different here. I had no idea." I said angrily, "What did you see?" Her little game was starting to get annoying. Or maybe I'm just fed up with other people, especially women. She said simply, "How inappropriate my actions are. You are conflicted. You don't want to be separated from your companion, but you don't see how you can be with her." I looked stunned. Maybe she did read minds. She added sympathetically, "The fact that she gave herself away is not an obstacle. You know that she only wants you. It is disrespect, a deliberate attempt to deceive you. That is what you consider unforgivable. You do not know how you can maintain your self-respect if you ignore the lack of attention she showed you by entering into a secret relationship." Okay, I didn't know how she did it, but that was the problem in a nutshell. It was a matter of preserving my pride. Pride is the deadliest sin because it concerns who you are. Lust, greed, gluttony, laziness, envy, anger, these are simple crimes. You can overcome them by suppressing the desire. But pride is innate. Pride dictates how you see yourself and how you behave. If you have too much pride, you're a smug asshole. If you have too little, you're a wuss. The problem is that the mindset required to maintain an acceptable balance must be constantly adjusted as new challenges arise. Otherwise, you sacrifice your self-respect. I could accept Brenda sleeping with Tadwell if she could convince me that she had learned her lesson. The real trauma was that she deliberately conspired to share her intimate self with a person I hated. The pleasure Tadwell got from conquering Brenda must have been more rewarding than the sex itself. That violation required an appropriate response, otherwise I would lose all sense of personal self-respect or dignity. To me, the only acceptable response to deliberate betrayal would be to end the marriage. Of course, Brenda would have her excuses. They might even seem convincing at first glance. But what do you say to someone who decides to cheat and then lies about it? What could Brenda say to reassure me that she wouldn't do this again? It was a real existential dilemma. Sartor would be pleased. Stella was clearly following my thoughts as these feelings passed through my mind. And yes, I began to believe that she could actually do it. Her beautiful face reflected my changing emotions as I considered the situation. She said enthusiastically, "I will be your companion. We are both single now." This remained to be seen, but it was late and I had a difficult day ahead. I said, "Do you mind if we sleep now?" She nodded and said, "Our sleep cycles are not like yours, but I need to turn off my mind, and the darkness helps me do that." Okay, that was interesting. Is she really a robot? I turned off the light because I didn't want to think about it. Brenda met me at the door. She looked terrible. She said sadly, "Polly called me names last night. Apparently, she saw the video that Tadwell sent around the world. I didn't see it because I'm not on his contact list." I looked skeptical. She said with a feeling of shame, "He took me off his phone when we started dating. He said he wanted to avoid suspicion." I thought to myself, what an idiot. Brenda said, "I saw the clip and all the incriminating messages. By the way, thanks for not showing me. I don't know how I could meet my friends after seeing these vile things." She added sadly, "I don't know why Richard sent these things out, but he ruined his life. Polly is divorcing him, and the Air Force is starting an investigation. Adultery is a crime in the Army, you know." Then she realized she meant something else and hastily added, "I haven't spoken to Richard since my world fell apart. Polly told me all about it." I might warn Brenda that Turd's current problems are just the tip of the iceberg. I had much more diabolical thoughts about where his life would go once I reached the dark web, but that was between me and Turd. My current goal was to secure an acceptable exit from the marriage. Like every morning for the past 14 years, we sat at our kitchen table and drank delicious French coffee. I'm sure I looked just as depressed as she did. Her eyes were puffy and red from crying. Her hair was tousled, and she looked like she hadn't slept. People react differently to betrayal. The more emotional ones lose control. They cry, scream, throw things, and engage in self-destructive behavior. This is because they are frustrated by their inability to change the injustice of their circumstances. I guess it's cool if that's who you are. Temperamental outbursts may even seem good at the time, but they are self-destructive. You get nothing but anger and disappointment. Shit happens. The key to maintaining personal pride lies in how you respond to it. Brenda and I were both strong-willed. That was part of the attraction. We were practical people. We could always accept what we couldn't change, and we had the wisdom to know the difference. We also knew that the circumstances were what they were. Now we had a responsibility to deal with this as civilly as possible. We had 14 good years. None of us wanted to ruin those happy times. Therefore, there was no melodrama. Just two people who once loved each other coping with an unthinkable tragedy in the best possible way. She looked at me with sincere hope. I stared back with inevitability. At last, she said plaintively, "This is the end, isn't it?" I nodded. She continued, "I knew at the moment I saw the video clip. I swear it meant nothing to me, which makes my actions even more baffling." I continued to just stare at her, devastated. She sighed and said with an ironic laugh, "It's better that way. I probably wouldn't respect you if you wanted to stay married." Brenda was a very tough and pragmatic woman. I said, "It's not the sex. That was bad enough. But the deception was the deciding factor." Then I paused. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I said with deep grief, "Why did you conspire with that pathetic fool to deceive me?" Her face turned pale. She dropped her head onto her attractive chest and began to cry, the wings of her hair hiding her beautiful face. I was waiting. Finally, she collected herself, wiped her eyes, and said with intensity in her voice, "When do you think I fell?" This question took me by surprise. I shrugged and said, confused, "Why is this important?" She said, "Because it proves what a stupid woman I am." She stopped and collected her thoughts. She then said, "Before we fought over Richard, I didn't do anything that didn't pass my husband's test. He probably gave me signs, but I was too stupid to see them, so I thought that your concerns were misplaced and juvenile. The next time he came, I told Richard what you told me, and he assured me that he would stop coming. That's when it happened. I thought the situation was resolved and was about to walk him to the door. But first I took our coffee cups to the sink. He came up behind me and kissed me. I didn't expect it. So I hesitated, got confused, and at that moment I was lost." Brenda saw my agony and added softly, "It had nothing to do with the man. It was the situation, the very feeling of being forbidden. I've always been a good girl, and now here I am, having sex with my neighbor." She added sadly, "Then there was self-justification. I see myself as a moral person. I knew he forced me first, but most of the time I was completely involved. How can you justify this?" Brenda gave me a grim smile and said, "My self-perception couldn't handle the truth, because otherwise I would have been just a woman of easy virtue, and I didn't want to go there voluntarily." I refrained from commenting. "Seriously? Are you asking me if I believe you?" Answer, "Completely. Brenda loves sex. I think everyone in the area knew it. This was the reason why she was considered so hot. A normal person would make a mental note and move on. But a sociopath like Turd had to rise to the challenge, so to speak. Why did he do such a disgusting thing? Because I could. It was part of his need to prove, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say, convince himself that he was as powerful and entitled as he thought. This is a characteristic of a true narcissist, a person who has no idea that other people have feelings." Brenda winced and said, "Never underestimate the power of guilt in a good Catholic girl. My actions killed me, so I desperately needed the opportunity to forgive myself." She added hesitantly, "It was obvious I wouldn't like it." Then Richard started crying. He told me how much I meant to him, how I saved his life. That's when I found my salvation. I saved Honey, a sensitive and misunderstood soul, from a bad situation. Brenda winced and said, "I won't lie. The sex was amazing. It was just so new, so excitingly forbidden. I knew it was wrong. But my excuse was that you'll never know, so you won't be wounded. It was a sad illusion. But what other options did I have?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said with a feeling of guilt, "The seal was broken. I was a cheater. So yes, I met him 3 more times. It was the same as the last time. I flew down and we met at the hotel." She realized how much she had upset me. She took my hand in hers, her eyes searching my face, and she said, "I was 2 people. Most of me was your devoted wife. I never lost an ounce of love or respect for you." Then she winced and added, "But the other part of me loved being rough. It wasn't love. I thought it was okay because you'd never know. At least that was my selfish reasoning. I was a dishonest fool, both for you and for myself." She finished, "The irony is that I just told him that this is the last time. He said he wanted one to remember me, and I was already in the room. So I thought, why not? Like, is this pathetic?" She paused and said, "This is my story. I know you and I understand the consequences. I take full responsibility for my actions and will sign any agreement you offer me. I will do this because I love you and know that that's right. I finally realized it." You can admire your opponent after a hard battle. This is how I felt about my soon-to-be ex-wife. Brenda may have been a cheater in one incarnation, but the woman I loved was now in control of the process. In the end, this man completed the job with dignity. I hugged her as I left. I said, "I'll contact Jim Eastman. He was our family lawyer. Since the divorce will be relatively amicable, he will be able to represent both of us." I added, "Then I'll disappear for a while. I have wounds that need to be healed, and I want to do it in a private place. I'll have to negotiate with Sandia, but they owe me, so I don't think they'll mind." She put her hand on my cheek, looked sadly into my eyes, and said, "I understand and I'm sorry. I'll be here if you change your mind." She started crying as she closed the door. I drove to the nearest park and vomited. Now there was only an empty landscape in front of me. It was terrifying. It's funny how people's moral positions change depending on the circumstances. I was divorcing Brenda because of her secretiveness. At the same time, I lived with a woman who was much more beautiful than my beautiful wife, and Brenda knew nothing about it. So who is the liar now? Of course, I couldn't tell Brenda that this woman was with me because she was from another planet. Oh, and by the way, did I mention she's a telepath? I would be locked in a room with padded walls. I was also sure that Brenda would have a hard time accepting any assurances that my relationship with Stella was purely platonic, especially when she saw her. So although I had temporarily settled things in one direction, an even stranger problem awaited me. Stella was still in her robe when I returned. She watched in fascination on the TV, which was playing an episode of Friends. She said excitedly, "I studied Earth culture." I highly doubted that Chandler, Ross, Joey, Monica, or Rachel represented any culture outside of TV land. But I said, "Have you eaten anything?" She said happily, "Yes, I ate my waffle for the day," and pointed to the thing on her wrist. She took one of the waffles out of her wrist device and showed it to me. It was a half-inch cube. All I could think about was Soylent Green. I asked, "Do you want anything else?" She said, satisfied. "No, that's enough for the next 24 hours. I asked, "And you live on this?" She said, "Of course, it's a complete diet." I asked, "Does it have a taste?" I ordered food for myself through room service. She looked puzzled and asked, "Why? Is it supposed to have a taste?" The idea struck me. She really does make a convincing impression of someone who has never lived on Earth. Although I didn't believe it. It was too cliched. I asked, "How old are you?" She said absent-mindedly, still watching the antics of the fun group in Central Perk. 277 for my next birthday. She looked 26. I whistled and said jokingly, "You're pretty well preserved for an old lady." She snapped back, "What do you mean old? I've only lived a quarter of my normal lifespan." I didn't argue with the crazy lady. Instead, I said, "We'll have to buy you clothes. You can't wear what you came to Earth in." She said offendedly, "What's wrong with my suit?" "This is the latest style on the Murhick style on the KHH Psi." I nodded towards the screen and said, "You need to look more like these women if you want to fit in. Otherwise, people might start thinking you're not from here." With a wiggle of my eyebrows and a wink, I conveyed the concept of alien autopsy. She looked horrified and said, "How can I wear anything else? This is all I have." "I have an idea." I said, "Your current outfit wouldn't look out of place at Walmart. We can buy you clothes there." At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and the room service boy wheeled in a cart filled with bagels and salmon. I tried to tip him, but he couldn't take his eyes off Stella. He crashed into the door on his way out. I spread cream cheese on my bagel and said, "Try this. This is what we eat here." She took a bite. Her eyes rolled back, and she trembled all over. She said with a breath, "Is this what taste means?" An hour later, we were entering the Walmart in San Mateo. Stella constantly stumbled upon shop windows, looking around in fascination. She said with delight, "Look at all these beautiful things. I've never heard anyone talk about Walmart products like that. The Chinese would be flattered." Brenda spent 2 hours in the clothing aisle and another 40 minutes in the cosmetics section. She said seriously, "I learned about all this on the Home Shopping Network." One of the things that was obvious from the very beginning was Stella's lack of underwear. So while she was trying on clothes, I moved towards the women's underwear section. Women may not realize this, but no man wants to be seen in the women's tech section of any store. Therefore, I approached the saleswoman as if she were a dealer in illegal substances. Her badge said Ruby Sue. I asked Ruby Sue if she could sell me some basic lingerie. She looked at me askance, as if she thought I was buying it for myself. I nodded towards Stella and said, "This is for her." Stella sat on the floor, happily trying on shoes. I said explanatorily, "She's special." Ruby Sue nodded and winked. Apparently, this was a regular part of their clientele. She asked, "What size is she?" I said, "I have no idea." Seriously, men don't know anything about breasts. We just love playing with them. The saleswoman said, "She looks like a 32D or a double D." I said, "I'd go with the biggest size. They're huge." Stella changed clothes in the fitting room. Walmart had no problem allowing me in as her guardian. I imagine this happens to them often. I had to get used to the fact that my star girlfriend had no complexes about her body. She simply took off her suit and happily put on her new lingerie. The bra required some explanation. When she finally got it on, and by the way, I was right about the size, she cupped her beautiful big breasts in her hands and said, "It's comfortable, although the back is a little hard." She wore a white blouse and a plaid skirt that made her look like a student from one of the prestigious colleges. The clothes may have been from Walmart, but the body was extraterrestrial. I really wanted Stella out of my life. She was extremely complex, and her alien behavior made it difficult to concentrate on important things. It was like taking care of a 5-year-old child. But unlike a child, Stella literally stopped traffic wherever she appeared. I was especially worried about being seen in public with her, at least until all the pieces fell into place. My soon-to-be ex-wife didn't deserve this revelation. Yes, I knew it was all Brenda's fault. But cool guys don't party in the end zone after a touchdown. It's just a lack of class. I could tell Brenda about Stella, but what would that do? This doesn't mean I'm cheating on my soon-to-be ex-wife. We're already getting divorced. So when we got back to the room, I said, "I want to take you to dinner tonight. It'll be like we do on Earth. We dress up and spend the evening talking. You saw it on TV, right?" She nodded vigorously. I asked, "Do you want to try it?" My star girl was very inspired. Apparently, she saw something similar on Real Housewives and wanted to try it. She also wanted to continue her taste experiment. I said, "I need to take care of personal matters. I'll be back around 6 in the evening to pick you up." I didn't want to talk about Stella's future while sitting in our room. I spent the day working on plans for the separation. It would have been an easy divorce since he was amicable. Easy, except for the heart that should have been broken. Part of me still wondered why I was doing this. That is, until the ghost of Richard Tadwell popped up and said, "Yeah, why are you doing this, man? She's so good in bed." Thanks, Turd, that was just the reminder I needed. In gratitude, I spent some time on Silk Road buying him a few nice gifts, such as an anonymous beating and a controlled substance charge. It cost bitcoins. I walked past the advertisements for hired killers. I wanted Turd to suffer for a long time, and he will feel it when I finish exposing him on the dark web. This place is scary. I also made arrangements to take a couple of weeks off. My team could handle it without me, and the bureaucrats didn't care what I did as long as I protected their asses. I needed to help Stella. Whether it would be psychological help or astrophysical help was still not clear. Stella was ready when I returned. She was great. I knew that my star girl was beautiful, but I just stood there with my mouth open. In turn, she looked absolutely terrified. She must have used something like YouTube to learn how to apply makeup. She hadn't worn it until now. The enhancement elevated her extraterrestrial beauty to an intergalactic level. We just went downstairs to a restaurant that wasn't 5-star, but we had no chance of going to one of the prestigious places without attracting attention to Stella. She might even attract the paparazzi. A woman of such beauty should be famous, right? The last thing I wanted was for Brenda to think I had a replacement ready. Not because I was trying to avoid appearing vindictive. I just knew that our divorce would be much less constructive if Brenda thought that I had changed her for a better person. Stella was wearing an emerald green dress. It matched her incredible eyes perfectly. The dress showed off plenty of stylish cleavage, and great legs underneath the short hemline. She even wore sexy heels. They made her legs and round ass even more amazing. She was either incredibly flexible or used anti-gravity to master walking in heels. Stella said excitedly, "Do I look good? Is this what you expected?" It was perhaps the biggest understatement since, "Houston, we have a problem." I wondered if there was an insecurity gene built into the X chromosome. My only concern was that I would have to fight off predators with a stick. When we were seated, I ordered for both of us. I tried to keep it simple as Stella claimed to have lived her entire life on what looked like fish food. She insisted on trying everything I ordered. Her little sounds of pleasure sounded like I was making love to her. She continued to give me thoughtful glances. She knew why we were there. Remember, she supposedly reads minds. Finally, I said, "Okay, so how do we get you back to your planet?" She stopped halfway and looked unhappy. She said, "Why do you think I want to come back?" I asked, "Don't you have a family or perhaps a special person you want to get back to?" I know this sounds crazy, but it was much easier to act as if she simply came from another planet. She paused, as if contemplating an answer. She said carefully, "I never had a family. In KHH Psi, children are not raised that way. There is no one to return to. They were probably all collected by KHH Roar." Then she hesitated and added shyly, "Maybe you are my special someone. Have you ever thought about it?" I said unbelievably, "How can you even say that? We've only known each other for 24 hours. She tapped her finger on her head and said, "I know everything about you. You are the one I value in a life partner. You are kind, decent, smart, funny, and adventurous. I know that your current partner made a huge mistake by doing what she did. What she did, I would never make such a mistake." Then it dawned on me. Maybe this opened a way forward. But first I needed to absolutely confirm something. I looked closely at Stella, trying to read her face, and said, "When I went to bed last night, you said that you needed to turn off your mind. What did you mean?" I knew the question was unexpected. I wanted it to be like this. Let's see what she says to this. She laughed and answered immediately. "Our race has always interacted telepathically. We may have once communicated by voice, but our planet is much older than yours." She added casually, "Our telepathic receptors are omnidirectional. It's like human hearing, so there's always background noise. We screen our minds out of politeness. People on your planet don't do that. So I have to filter it, and it's tiring. It helps if I can turn off my sensors. It's like your need for sleep." Wow, this was too detailed an explanation to make up. I said, stunned. "So, what are you telling me, really? Are you really an alien? But still, you're just a woman." It was like saying the SR-71 Blackbird is just a plane. But I was still trying to wrap my head around the idea that the gorgeous beauty sitting across from me was real. She gave me a gentle smile and said, "Of course I am. Countless humanoid civilizations inhabit the universe. We are all biologically similar. As I said, this is the most effective configuration." I added, still stunned, "Seriously, there's a portal to a million other worlds in white sands, and you're really a refugee from another planet." She said conversationally, as if we were discussing bus stops. "Well, now there's another portal in the Jurassic Mountains. It's near a place called CERN. They built it when your race started experimenting with subatomic particles. I think it's called the Big One. Hadron Collider. This is another great achievement." Wow. First I found my wife making love to another man. Now I'm talking to a real alien, and it wasn't an ugly little creature with Einstein's eyes. Human. Spielberg was very wrong. Stella smiled brightly and said, "You believe me now," I said, sounding a little dazed. "I believe you." She said joyfully, "So, can I be your companion? I'm even ready to go through the commitment ceremony. This would bind us for life." I said, still a little hesitant, "Let's take this step by step. We're not using a killer device to ensure we stay together." She looked puzzled, as if she didn't understand how we could do this differently. I smiled lovingly, and for the first time I felt loving instead of annoyed. She truly was a sweet, modest, and simple woman. I felt that underneath all this alien weirdness, there was an extremely pure soul. I said softly, "We need to learn to be bound, and I am still legally bound to another woman. This must be officially broken before we can be bound to each other." Well, if I was going to connect with this beautiful little alien, I might as well start speaking her language. The jump was sudden, but you know how it goes. I felt a natural attraction to Stella almost from the moment I discovered her in the desert. She was the embodiment of femininity in the physical sense, as beautiful as a movie star. But her friendly and joyful character attracted me. There was not a drop of anger or deceit in her. She said enthusiastically, "Now can we have sex?" It felt like a proposal from all the hot girls who had ever populated my most special teenage dreams. But of course, there was a catch. I laughed and said, "In our society, there are rules. We call them morals. These rules guide the process of commitment. They are really just common sense things you do to avoid hurting other people. But they are an integral part of human life. So you will have to learn what it is before we can be connected." Stella looked like she wanted me to get to the point. I added, laughing, "One of those rules is that two people can't have sex if they're involved with another person. Right now, I'm still bound by the promise I made to my ex-companion, and I'll lose my honor if I do. Having sex with you before this agreement is essentially broken by mutual consent." Stella looked very disappointed, which didn't even come close to describing how I felt. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. They were tiny and silky smooth, like a warm cup of tea in fine porcelain. This was the first time we touched each other. The feeling of intimacy and love exploded in my head like a supernova. Stella conveyed her feelings directly and without shielding. They gave me an overwhelming feeling of peace and satisfaction. I said, "I have no idea why I'm so lucky, but I know that we can live a happy life together, and that starts here and now. I'm human. You're not human, so it doesn't matter if it's 50. I spent a little time looking for a place for us. I wanted a safe place, close to the city, where Stella could begin to get accustomed to the earth and earth ways. We spent the 2 weeks I took off setting up the place while I racked up my huge Marriott account. I felt like I needed to keep Stella a secret. I know this sounds hypocritical, because Brenda's secrecy is what ended our marriage. But I hid my star girlfriend for another reason. First of all, I didn't have sex with her. More importantly, our marriage is already over. It just wasn't officially terminated yet, and I wanted to keep the process amicable. Many divorces descend into bitterness and hostility. People make noise, beat each other up, and experience emotional distress. But the process can proceed without hostility and chaos. Brenda and I were worthy enough to interact in a civilized manner. Or maybe we were just sticking to the old principle: never show that you're sweating. Either way, none of us showed how hurt we were. Instead, we discussed it until the end, which, while not ideal, was something we could both live with. During one of these discussions, other people's perspectives came up. The transition to other people was a foregone conclusion. We were both quite attractive and heterosexual, so there will inevitably come a time when we begin this journey. Brenda said, confused, "Davy, I want to talk about where we go from here. I've been asked out by a lot of men since we broke up, and I want your permission to start dating again." It wasn't as patronizing as it sounded. Obviously, we'll both find other people. Brenda was wonderful, and of course, I had already found my one. So I was actually glad and relieved that she showed me enough respect to make the first move. I smiled my kindest smile and said, "You have been a wonderful wife, and I know you will be the same for the next lucky guy. You are a stunningly attractive woman, and it would be a crime to hide your beauty. So we both need to start the process of leaving each other." She looked at me sadly. Her expression said, "I wish we could move together, not apart." I added softly, "We both need a fresh start." I believed in it. There is never a way back once the connection is broken, no matter how much you want it. If you do this, it will always be an imperfect compromise with the past. Stella gave me the promise of a bright future. I wanted Brenda to have that same hope. I also recognized my star girlfriend. Stella could have emerged from a wormhole from the center of the galaxy, but her personality seemed like she came on a bus from Nebraska. She was simple, happy, and benevolent, not an inflexible alien superintelligence. Although sometimes I had to warn her not to get into my head. She continued to peek in cautiously, like a devoted golden retriever, just checking, wanting to be sure. I rented a house in Sandia Heights, which was convenient to take Highway 556 to the National Laboratories. The area was upscale, but still had a rural feel. This gave Stella space to walk around without worrying about close neighbors. The guy I rented the house from wanted to sell it, so we made a deal. Once the divorce is finalized, I will buy him for his asking price. At this time, the house was taken off the market. The purchase took place a month and a half later. Helping Stella adapt to my world more than made up for any residual regrets about losing Brenda. Stella's world was a preview of Earth's future. It was catastrophically overcrowded and polluted to the point that trillions of its inhabitants had to live inside polymer domes. Therefore, their society was, of necessity, highly regulated and limited. Each person was assigned a role at birth, and they spent their lives doing what was assigned to them. Stella herself was a console operator at the transportation center, so she had knowledge in one small area that was completely irrelevant in my world. Imagine mobile phones. They are ubiquitous. Everyone uses them. But very few of us understand how cell phone electronics or the cellular network work or are able to build one. This was Stella's situation. She was not one of those who created and controlled the technology or directed the work. She was a simple technician. Now let's go back to the 18th century. Knowing how to use a cell phone wouldn't do you any good back then. At the same time, everyone around you would know how to handle life better than you. This was the challenge that Stella faced. Even if she had experience of a world that was much more advanced, she had to learn to live here. She spent hours on the internet. They had something similar in her world, but access was built into the human mind. All you had to do was think. Now Stella had to master social networks and everything else related to life online. Even worse, she had to do it on a device that she considered one step above the stone tablet. When Stella learned to talk, dress, and behave like an ordinary earthly woman, I began to take her to different places, like an ordinary couple. One evening, we had dinner at Antiquity, a restaurant located in Albuquerque's historic square. They served the best Chateaubriand in the city. Brenda and I ate there often. No man would feel completely confident appearing in public with a woman like Stella. She causes a stir wherever she goes. Next stretch, people stare. It's like the reaction of the inhabitants of the African savanna when a lion appears. However, I wasn't worried about losing her since she didn't seem to notice other people. It was like I left an imprint on her like a duckling. That night, she wore a classic little black dress with a simple string of pearls. She has such perfect features that when you look at her, you get the feeling of looking at a beautiful work of art. All the men and some women looked at her with lust as she sat comfortably in the intimate booth against the wall. We shared a plate of carpaccio, and Stella was so enamored with the little pieces of beef that she quietly purred and purred in my head. At that moment, a friendly voice said, "Hi, Davy. I knew I would meet you sooner or later." I heard this voice for 14 years, so I said happily, without looking up, "Brenda, good to see you." She was standing next to our table with a guy who was clearly her date. She looked as energetic and sexy as ever. I stood up from the booth and said, introducing myself, "Stella, this is my ex-wife Brenda." Stella looked up and said calmly, "It's nice to finally meet you, Brenda. Davy has nothing but good things to say about you." It was cruel. The full force of Stella's beauty made Brenda and her companion blink. It was like the reaction when you step out of the shadows into bright light. Brenda said, embarrassed, "This is my fiancé, Tom." We shook hands. I knew who Tom Holland was. He was the largest developer in the entire Middle Rio Grande Basin and was rumored to be a GOP candidate for a Senate seat. We've both definitely upped our ante. I said, "Nice to meet you, Tom, and I wish you both nothing but happiness." Then there was the typical smiling retreat maneuver that people do when they can't get out of a situation fast enough. I sat back down and they went to their table. Holland took one last, incredulous glance back. Stella said calmly, "She still regrets losing you, and this man has very dirty thoughts." The chance meeting with Brenda was just a coincidence. We were at Antiquity for a different reason. I looked into Stella's incredible emerald eyes and said, "I told you we have a commitment ceremony where two people commit to each other." She said, "Yes, but there is no implant that guarantees fidelity." I said, "But we have a symbol that a woman wears to show her devotion." I have learned to somewhat mask my thoughts, so it was a surprise when I took out the ring. I said, "We can only promise to be faithful, but I would die before I betrayed that." The explosion of pure, genuine love almost knocked me out of the booth. She said enthusiastically, "Now can we have sex?" We had sex for the first time that night. I was nervous. It wasn't about performance. It was the anxiety you feel when taking that last intimate step with the most important person in your life. An additional complication was that this woman was not entirely human and came from a culture where the act of sex was more transactional than intimate. So I wanted to take things slow. We both knew what would happen, so we went straight to the bedroom. I approached my star girl and looked into her unearthly emerald eyes. I said, "How do you start making love in your world?" She said indifferently, "We just do it. There is no ritual." She added nervously, "I've never done this with someone I feel this way about, and I'm afraid I'll do something wrong." My thoughts were exactly the same, so I said, "Come here," and kissed her. She looked at me with wide eyes, with an expression as if she had never been kissed before and had just discovered that she liked it. I said, stunned, "You've never kissed anyone." She answered as if it was a stupid question. "What does this have to do with sex?" I realized that this would be a special experience. We made love. I said to myself, "I can't believe this amazing woman is mine." She slowly opened her eyes and looked at me in surprise. She said, "Now I understand why people bond for life." Stella and I had an incredible sex life. She seemed to miss it. She said that she had never had such an experience of sex with emotional attachment. She said she didn't even realize emotions were involved. Sex in her world was like going to the gym. The whole world used the network for connections. If you wanted sex, you simply chose the profile of your closest partner. You had sex. Then they left ratings and reviews. It may have been impersonal, but it was definitely effective. Stella said that emotional attachment made intimate sensations even more intense. I told her that this is why sex in this world is called making love. This insight seemed to give her a great new social discovery. We got in touch a month after the divorce. Stella didn't want to use the term married. She said it didn't reflect her feelings for me. The binding concerned only her and me. This would be true even if Stella's relatives did not live in another branch of the galaxy. It was just who we were. Stella insisted on Invidian bondage, so her home world eventually translated into my head. I understood why she wanted to do it this way once we went through the ceremony. We decided to spend it in a special place, so we spent our wedding night in the Ray half-dome tent. We were sitting on a rocky outcrop on Shield Face, a huge cliff outside Albuquerque in the Sandia Range. The sun was setting over the purple vastness of the desert landscape. The city lights began to flicker in the growing darkness below us. Stella was delighted. Her planet may have been more advanced, but she paid for it with catastrophic overpopulation and environmental destruction. Life there was a joyless exercise. My world was a wonderful landscape of new experiences, and Stella celebrated every discovery she made. My bride wore rough camp clothes rather than a long white dress. We reached the knife-edge cliff along a path that can only be traversed by experienced hikers and climbers. Stella handled it better than most regulars. One of Stella's oddities was that she could handle any physical challenge without effort. I began to realize that, in addition to reading minds, my new wife had abilities that earthly inhabitants did not have. We dangled our feet over the edge. The July evening was soft and balmy, and Stella told me to lie down on the rock. She lay down next to me, holding my hand. The sky darkened to shades of purple and red. The moon rose, and the first stars began to appear. Stella pointed to the Pleiades and said gently, "Focus on this." I followed her finger to a familiar cluster of stars. As I did this, I felt her carefully enter my mind. She installed a tiny psychic beacon that broadcast a clear and stable signal of caring love. This formed a powerful subconscious connection between us. When she finished, she said in a benediction, "This will remain between us forever. We are now bound." And that's how we got married. It was not in the ordinary sense, but as deep, true, and permanent as any ceremony performed before a priest. Life went on like this for almost a year. It was an endless series of adventures and simple joys. I've never been happier. But of course, the gods love to play tricks on me. So I returned home from work to a beautiful fall day in the desert. The sun was shining, and the temperature was around 70. Football season has begun, and I have been wondering how the Lobos will fare in the Mountain West Conference this season. I walked in from the garage, humming a happy tune, and saw my wife. She stood in our kitchen with the most handsome man I've ever seen anywhere in movies, on TV, on the cover of GQ. He was wearing the same suit as the one Stella was wearing when I first found her. Stella looked gloomy. She said, "Davy, we need to talk." These fateful words usually foreshadow great grief, but I felt my little beacon emitting a clear, stable signal. Nothing has happened to disrupt our connection yet. However, my blood pressure shot up to heart attack levels because of the expression on Stella's face. She said resignedly, "It's Kalo. He's a gruff grower. He's come to take me back to Invidium." The idea of a bounty hunter came to mind. I bleated, "Back to where?" Although I knew exactly what she was talking about, it was just a knee-jerk reaction. Besides being handsome like a Greek god, Kalo was built like one. I wondered if there was anyone on Stella's planet who wasn't unearthly perfection. He grinned disdainfully and said as if he were talking to a pet, "We've been looking for Stella ever since she jumped through the portal. Now that we've found her, I'm here to bring her back." I said, "This is crazy. She loves me. Why would she want to leave with you?" The guy just looked at me as if he couldn't believe he was arguing with such an insignificant creature. Finally, he said, "She has no right to be here. It might alert your authorities to our presence." He then made a sound of annoyance, turned and said, "I'm not here to argue with you, Earthling. Come on, Stella, the portal will only be open for a few minutes." Stella said angrily, "I told you, I'm not coming back. I have a life here with a man I owe to. Nothing you say or do will make me leave with you." Mr. UFO said scornfully, "You cannot be associated with a lower being." A security camera in the corner of the ceiling and said, "If you're kidnapping Stella because your Invidian masters don't want her revealing your presence, how do you think they'll react when they find out you are proving the existence of extraterrestrial life through TMZ and Fox News?" I laughed, trying to sound more confident than I was, and added, "We have this thing called the internet. It's out of your league. But I can assure you that you will become a global viral sensation if you don't sit down with your flying saucer, and you won't go back to where you came from." Mr. UFO stopped and looked at the camera. He looked puzzled. Apparently, superminds are not so observant. Or maybe he underestimated us Earthlings. I knew what he was thinking. I said informatively, "You're trapped. There's nothing local to erase. You'll never find the recording. It's broadcast to a cloud account. So smile." The alien released Stella's hand and turned to me. He said, "You won't be able to report it if you're vaporized." With that, he pulled out what looked like a fountain pen. I didn't think he was going to write me a check. I wasn't afraid. I was inspired. I thought, at least I'll die protecting the woman I love. Then I knocked him out. She held an old-fashioned cast iron frying pan in both hands. It was a very effective low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. The lighthouse in my head flashed brightly. It was Stella, soaring with joy. She said, "I was always afraid that someone would come for me. I think we're finally safe." Of course, this presented us with a new problem. We needed to get rid of the body. There are many ghost towns around Albuquerque. The closest one was called Golden. Golden was the center of gold mining for the entire Albuquerque area in the 19th century, hence the name. There was a Catholic church, saloons, shops, a school, and even a stock exchange. But the gold ran out at the end of the century, and by the 1920s Golden had become a ghost town. Their old cemetery is next to the restored church, built in 1830. Stella and I drove 30 miles from our house with Kalo strapped in the back seat, a la Weekend at Bernie's. The area was completely deserted, as we expected. I parked and left the headlights on. We dragged the body through a brittle desert bush and into an area of old graves. I was aware of the urban legends I was mixing up while burying an alien in a ghost town. The ground was mostly a sandy bed, so digging was easy. It's not like they had the guy's fingerprints. He will remain a mysterious unknown. That is, if he is ever found. We threw him into a hole and buried him. Then we returned to the truck. It was 10 o'clock in the evening when we finished our ominous work. I plopped down in a chair by the fireplace. Stella sat calmly in her usual position on the sofa. I asked, "Do you want to talk about it? After all, she just killed a man." She looked at me calmly and said, "There's nothing to talk about. I will never leave you." So I did what needed to be done. I dug deeper. Why? Maybe because I'm an insecure weakling. But then again, Stella just killed someone. I said, "How does that make you feel? Okay, Snowflake, this is enough." She said simply, "You are the person to whom I am indebted, and Kalo was going to turn you into a cloud of constituent particles. I could not let that happen. I promised to be your life partner, to support you in everything. I meant it." And this captured all that mattered in one simple statement. Married people take care of each other. This is a constant thing, regardless of the planet. This beautiful woman could have emerged from a wormhole from another branch of the galaxy, but she understood what love and loyalty meant. Time has passed, and we have grown old. Stella was fascinated by aging. She told me that the causes of aging are well understood, and if there is knowledge, then there is a way to control the process. We call it epigenetics here on Earth. We have even begun to conduct serious research on the manipulation of telomeres and genes, but the people in Stella's world perfected this process eons ago. It was like visiting a solarium. Every citizen went through a life cycle procedure. You lie down in a special device. It scans you and repairs any defects. Then you're ready for the next cycle. Because these cycles were similar to Earth's lifespan, citizens in Stella's world lived very long lives, always in perfect physical condition. Now we both felt the weight of the happy years we had spent together. Stella's incredible beauty prevented her from experiencing the classic signs of aging. In fact, she was beautiful at any age. I'm just getting old. My passion for fitness kept me relatively healthy, but there was no way to avoid the terrible diagnosis. This was draining the vitality from me, and Stella was in despair. When things became unbearable, my wife loaded me into our truck, and we headed south. There was a starry sky over the desert when she parked next to where we first met. We then began the painful journey through Jornada del Muerto to the obelisk. 4 miles is a long way for a nearly dead man, and it took several hours. Stella supported me every step of the way, her hand on her shoulder, like a warrior wounded by life. The 12-foot monument was visible as a black presence against the starry sky. The desert was silent. The wind was blowing from the west. I was sweating and breathing heavily from the effort. Stella released my hand and gently leaned me against the black lava of the obelisk. She was wearing the suit and the device on her arm that she had on when I first met her. She walked a few yards behind the obelisk and did something with the device. The air began to shimmer, and the stars in this part of the sky disappeared, giving way to a miniature galaxy. She came back to me, put my hand on her shoulder, and helped me get to that place. She said, "We'll make you well again, my love." It was a deep night at the Trinity site. The surroundings were as dark and lonely as a desert could be. Then a flicker appeared, which turned into a vague shape similar to a galactic wheel. The shimmer parted like a curtain, and two people walked through it. Then it disappeared. The man was fit and young. The woman was an absolutely magnificent example of femininity. They stood together for several long minutes, contemplating the night sky. Then they turned and walked, holding hands, along the path towards the distant road. She said with doubt in her voice, like a wife who had been married for a long time, "Are you sure the truck will start, honey?" He said in the patient voice of the archetypal husband. "Of course it will, my love. Just one day has passed. Now let's have breakfast. We have a whole life ahead of us." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.